Strong Fantasy Football Podcast. It is episode 23. We are breaking down the divisionals right now. We're going to be going through the AFC West today. Now, unfortunately, as you can see, I'm back in my photography studio. My co-host, Brian Tambo, the fantasy force here, cannot be with us due to a time constraint in his schedule. So we're going to be rolling through these four teams, just me and you guys today. So these are deep dives into the division. We're looking at each position in depth, examining the trends of each offense and tendencies of each position on the team. Longer episodes, loaded with information though. The verdicts should be on if you do or do not want players on your fantasy team. I'll walk you through those so you can also make your own decisions on if they're worth drafting for your team or not. So starting out at the top of the division, the Kansas City Chiefs, 14-2, lost the Super Bowl to the Buccaneers. At quarterback, we've got Patrick Mahomes, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Darrell Williams. For wide receivers, we're looking at Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Demarcus Robinson, and the tight end, as we all know him, Travis Kelce. The Chiefs had the number one ranked offense and the 16th best defense last year. They have a 62-38 pass first run split, so they do really favor that passing offense. They have the 11th hardest schedule coming up for 2021. So to start off with the quarterback, Patrick Mahomes finished as the quarterback for 108 QBR, threw for 4,700 yards, 38 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, which is really good for a quarterback. Had 308 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 5 games over 30 points, which is enough to just win you that week downright. Had only just one game under 20 points. It was the quarterback one in 2018, throwing 50 touchdowns during his first true season. And quarterback 8, 2019, that was the one year he got hurt, but that was the year they also won the Super Bowl. He's consistently drafted way too early, though, as the quarterback 1. This is mainly due to his name value being all over the face of the NFL. And with his big play potential, people like to remember the 35, 40-point weeks where he's just outright winning you fantasy games. But the problem is he's always been going in the rounds 2 through 3 where he has to be the quarterback 1 to finish, given that production. But the problem is if he finishes below quarterback 1 or 2, drafting him in rounds 2 or 3 is going to just not be good for your fantasy team. So my verdict is you don't draft Patrick Mahomes. Why? Because of what I just told you. Rounds 1 through 3 are way too important to be taking a quarterback over those running backs and wide receivers, because you can only start one quarterback, but you have to start 2 to 3 running backs or wide receivers. So you want the better ones at those positions versus drafting the best quarterback. So he has to finish as the quarterback 1 if you're taking him rounds 2 or 3. He really should be a mid or early 4th round pick given his production, because you will miss out on with other positions, as I've constantly mentioned. So he's an amazing quarterback, but where he typically goes in fantasy drafts, don't draft Patrick Mahomes. At least that's my opinion. You could be completely different, pick your own value, but for me, don't draft Patrick Mahomes. Now to dive into the Chiefs running backs, we got Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Darrell Williams, who's going to be serving as his handcuff. So last year, Clyde Edwards-Helaire had a lot of hype going to the draft. Damian Williams opted out, so Clyde was thrusted into the starting role as a rookie. Was going at the back end of the first round, early second round in most drafts, but only finished as a running back 22. Had a very disappointing year, only had 803 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns, added 36 receptions for 297 yards and 8 touchdowns. So in total, that gives him about 1,100 yards and 1 touchdown, which isn't bad for a rookie running back. So owners are super disappointed with them after taking him in the first round, but you got to think about it. The Chiefs no longer have Damian Williams. They cut Lev Bell. They revamped the offensive line. Andy Reid's running back is always fantasy relevant, and it's the best offense in football. Patrick Mahomes and Clyde Edwards-Helaire have both said they both want to throw the ball to the running back position some more. So I think running back 2 was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That was his floor. If he gets more passing work in the offense, he could be a top 5 back, and if he's going in the beginning of the 3rd or mid-3rd round, I think that's a steal. So if the rest of my league could just not listen to this and just let me draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the 3rd round, I'd be thrilled. Because the other running back in the room, Darrell Williams, running back 79 last year, he's just a handcuff. 170 rushing yards, 1 touchdown, 18 receptions, 116 yards. He just got signed a 1-year deal to continue being the handcuff back. So my verdict is, buy the dip on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, take Darrell as a high upside handcuff if for whatever reason you can fit him on your roster, and if something is happening to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, most of that work will be going directly to Darrell Williams. So the only reason Darrell Williams should be on your team is if you have him as an insurance policy, or you can fit him as a sneaky handcuff if something does happen to Clyde going throughout the season. Wide receivers. We got Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, and then Demarcus Robinson. So last year, Tyreek Hill finished as a wide receiver 2. He had 87 receptions for about 1,300 yards, 15 touchdowns, adding on to that 123 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 7 games over 100 yards. Best game was 13 for 269 and 3 touchdowns. And he only busted on you 3 times, which is 3 games under 10 points. One of which he actually did catch a touchdown but didn't know it. That was that game, I think, versus the Broncos where it hits him and he falls over and the ball just falls in his lap, but he thought it hit the ground, but it didn't. He would only have 2 games under 10 points if the refs made sure to call that an actual touchdown, which it was. The thing is, it's been shown that his speed and skill set destroy defenses, and it allows for Hill to win you a week at any given week. His running mate now, Mecole Hardman, finished as the wide receiver 57. Last year, he had 41 receptions for 560 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an additional 30 rushing yards as a little whipped cream on top. His best game was 4 for 81 and a touchdown. A lot of people like to joke as Mecole as being the one-touch man, basically meaning he gets a 1 catch and he takes it to the house and gets you about 12 points for the week. Now news has come out that he's going to be stepping into the Sammy Watkins role as the wide receiver 2 in the Chiefs system. If you want to know, Sammy Watkins finished last year as the wide receiver 94 and missed 5 games. So I don't know what that role is going to entail. Pretty much the ball is going to go to Mecole Hardman. If Tyreek is double covered, Travis Kelce's double covered, and it's only Mecole Hardman left on the field in one-on-one coverage. But the thing is, over the past few years, he really hasn't developed that unique skill tree yet. Maybe this is the year he manages to do it because he's now thrusted into that role. But it's going to be a wait and see on Mecole Hardman. Now, Demarcus Robinson is the last guy in the room. Wide receiver 78 last year. 45 receptions, 466 yards, 3 touchdowns. His best game is 4 for 63 and a touchdown. He's really just a spot start. You're throwing him into your flex or your wide receiver 2 spot if you have no one else to throw into. Even though the Chiefs' offense is super high-powered, once you get to your wide receiver 3, it's really just a complete shot in the dark. So my verdict would be you're drafting Tyreek Hill in round 1. If you're going to draft Mecole Hardman, you're drafting as a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 potential. And Robinson's is going to be a weekly starter that's just left in the stream. He's going to be picked up and thrown onto a roster for a week or 2 and then instantly cut once that owner realizes that he's not going to bring much to the table when it comes to the Chiefs' offense and fantasy production. And to talk about the most important player on this team is Travis Kelce when it comes to offensive weapons outside of Patrick Mahomes. So last year, it's the tight end 1 on the season. If he was a wide receiver, he would have finished as the wide receiver 4. He had 105 receptions for 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns. If you actually look closely at it, he's actually the number 1 target on the Chiefs, because he also had 10 more targets than Tyreek Hill did last season. He's the go-to player for when Patrick Mahomes needs to get bailed out or he's in a pinch or they're in the red zone. He's been the number 1 tight end for fantasy the past 5 seasons. He averages twice as more than the average top 10 tight end. So it's basically you're getting an extra tight end spot by having Travis Kelce on your team. So the verdict for Travis Kelce is take Travis Kelce if you miss out on the top end running backs. So if you're at pick 8, pick 9, and you don't get Tyreek Hill or Zeke Elliott, pick 10 or any ones around those picks, take Travis Kelce. You won't be able to have that double running back system, but having the extra points that Travis Kelce can give your team is going to be crucial to your fantasy season. Next team on the list, the 8-8 Las Vegas Raiders. They just missed playoffs this year. The quarterback, Derek Carr, running backs, Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake. Wide receivers, we got Henry Ruggs, John Brown, Hunter Renfrow, and then you have a bunch of other guys like Brian Edwards, Willie Snead, and Zay Jones. Their tight end, as we all know him, is Darren Waller. Last year, the Raiders had the 8th ranked offense and 25th ranked defense, which is really good for fantasy perspectives, which I'll get into. 56% of the time they're passing versus 44% of the time they're running the ball. They do have the 8th hardest schedule coming up for 2021, so do keep that in mind. Derek Carr. He finished as the quarterback 13, just missing out on QB1 status. He threw for 4,100 yards, 27 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Also added in a sneaky 140 rushing yards for 3 touchdowns. When I think about Derek Carr, I think about Jekyll and Hyde or the Hulk, and when he's not the Hulk. I'm blanking on his name right now, but you get the picture. So he busted in games you expected him to succeed, and boomed in games you expected nothing. Bruce Banner. He's either the Hulk or Bruce Banner, to be honest, because he had 9 games over 20 points and 1 game over 30 points. So you hear that and you're like, he must be pretty consistent. But then he also had 3 games under 10 points, including a game where he scored less than 2 points against the terrible defense of the Falcons. So the verdict for Derek Carr is, don't draft him in fantasy, but he's one of the better streaming options for a week-to-week spot start where he could prove you wrong and outperform what you think he's going to do, or he's going to completely destroy your fantasy team if you put him in that starting lineup. It's just a double-edged sword that you're going to have to live with. Getting into the running backs, Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake. So Josh Jacobs has fallen from the fantasy graces. Last year he finished as a running back 8, which sounds pretty good. Over 1,000 rushing yards, 12 touchdowns, 22 receptions for 240 yards, 5 games over 100 yards, 4 games over 20 points, including a week 1 30-point game versus the Carolina Panthers where he decimated their defense. Then he had 6 games under 10 points. Josh Jacobs only has a 3.9 yards per carry on 273 attempts. That's not good. He's also known as a fantasy troll. What that means is he hates fantasy football. He loves messing with players. There are times where he would say that he's playing and sit out, or he would sit out even though it says he's playing. So there were at points of there in the season where you didn't know if you could actually even start your main running back. Right behind him is Kenyon Drake, who was the running back 12 last year from the Cardinals. He had 955 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, 25 receptions for 137 yards, only had 2 games over 100 yards, and 6 games under 10 points. A very similar trend to Josh Jacobs. Even though they did finish as high-end running backs, you weren't thrilled with them if they were on your team. I do apologize, Juan, the fact that you had both of them on your team where at the end of the year, it looks like you should have done pretty well, but they both disappointed you throughout the season. The thing that I kind of don't like about the situation is they offered Kenyon Drake a massive deal for someone in his position to come join the Raiders, and he's constantly being praised by John Gruden because they're going to praise the guy who they just signed to a massive contract for what he's worth. So if you follow the trends on the money right now, Josh Jacobs is still on his rookie deal, set to make $3.2 million this year versus Kenyon Drake, who just signed a 2-year deal for $11 million. So Kenyon Drake is making $5.5 million this year to be the backup. So it feels weird saying that. Like something about that doesn't seem right. Like we've talked up or talked down Josh Jacobs before. Finding that stat just like it doesn't seem right where the starting running back is going to be making less than the backup. Something just feels like there's going to be more of a split workload than people really want there to be. So if Jacobs loses 20 to 40% of what he did last year, that places him in the running back 15 to 28 range where he's going in the 4th round. If Josh Jacobs ends up as the running back 15, you're not going to be disappointed. But if he ends up as the running back 28, that's going to be a miserable year. That's basically saying if Kenyon Drake is going to get that much of a workload, you can't draft either of them because they're not going to place high enough to really make a difference for your fantasy team. So my verdict is if you're going by Josh Jacobs, you need to know his range of outcomes before you actually draft him. And then you have to wait till the preseason to see the balance of the backfield to really believe if you want to pick up Kenyon Drake as a handcuff back. I think Kenyon Drake is going to be a guy who's picked up immediately if Josh Jacobs is to go down due to injury. But even if you do pick him up, you need to curb your expectations as a RB2 status for both of these guys because they've also decimated their offensive line in the offseason, losing 3 of their 5 starters. So they're going to have a shaky offensive line to start the season as well. The wide receiver room you got Henry Ruggs, John Brown, Hunter Renfrow, and the other names I've mentioned. So kind of similar to how we were talking about the Jets in the last episode, we've got a lot of guys with similar talent levels, and you're just hoping one breaks from the pack. So I just want to talk about John Brown first because he technically finished as a better wide receiver out of the group last year. Wide receiver 76 from the Bills, would have most likely finished higher in the year, but he did miss 7 games, 33 receptions, 458 yards, 3 touchdowns. His best game from last season was 4 for 82 and a touchdown. He never cracked 100 yards, but he did get one game where he got to 99. Next on our list is Henry Ruggs, wide receiver 87 last year. Only a 7% target market share from Derek Carr. 26 receptions for 450 yards and 2 touchdowns. His best game came from a breakout 2-catch game where he ended with 118 yards, 1 touchdown, and that was his only game over 100 yards as well. People were looking at him as a breakout candidate for year 2. But for me, it's going to come down to between him and John Brown, who becomes the number 1 wide receiver for this offense, and if Derek Carr starts trusting his receivers a little bit more. Because he's used as a deep threat, although his skill set is better used as a short to mid-range pass catcher than to break it off for a long distance. But we'll see what the Raiders end up doing with him in their offense going into this next year. Hunter Renfrow, who I actually just tried to mention, is wide receiver 64 last year. 14% of the target market from Derek Carr. Ended the year with 56 receptions for 656 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's best in the slot. He's a slot possession receiver. He's going to be looked at not to make the big play, but just to get the team down the field. Last year, his best game was 6 for 84 and 1 touchdown, and that was Hunter Renfrow in a nutshell. So my verdict is you're taking a late round long shot for either Brown or Ruggs to emerge as the number 1 receiver on the team. Renfrow is going to be a streamer with wide receiver 3 potential and some upside depending on the situation and game flow, but Hunter Renfrow shouldn't be drafted. He'll be sitting there in the stream when you need to pick up a spot start because you had an injury happen to your current roster. The tight end, Darren Waller, finished the year as the tight end 2, would have been the wide receiver 8 if he was playing wide receiver. He's by far the number 1 target, 107 receptions for 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns. He alone takes up 26% of the target share in Las Vegas. His best game was 13 receptions for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 5 games over 100 yards and 11 games over 8 points, his best being a 38.5 game, which I just mentioned before. If you want some consistency, last year, with his first year in the Raiders system, he finished as the tight end 3 in 2019. He is the focal point of the offense. Regardless of the additional weapons, Derek Carr looks for Darren Waller down the field. Also, goal line plays are designed for him over running backs. If you were Josh Jacobs' owner last year, the amount of times where you think Josh Jacobs was about to score on the 2 or 3 yard line and they would do a play action pass to Darren Waller was too many times for you to deal with unless you were the Darren Waller owner. So the verdict is draft Darren Waller if you can. If he's sitting there in the 3rd round and you're comfortable taking him as your first pass catcher, you're not going to be disappointed. Even though he's not going to be one of the flashy wide receivers, he would have been a top 10 receiver anyway if he was playing wide receiver. So he's going to be a dominant threat in your tight end position, and you never really have to worry about streaming a tight end. And you can relax going to that position week for week if you have Darren Waller on your team. Next up on the list is the Los Angeles Chargers. They went 7-9 last year and missed playoffs. Their roster looks like right now Justin Herbert at quarterback. Running back looks like Austin Eckler and Joshua Kelly. In the wide receiver room, you've got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Jalen Guyton. I fill that name there reluctantly because no one knows his name, and he's going to have a monster year for anyone to really pay attention to who he is. At tight end, you have Jared Cook. The Chargers finished with the 9th offense and 10th ranked defense last year. They had a 59-41 pass run split, so they're a lot more pass heavy than with their running backs. 16th easiest schedule, which is the 17th hardest. They're right in the middle when it comes to strength of schedule for 2021. They have a new head coach in Brandon Staley, new offensive coordinator in Joe Lombardi. So Lombardi had 5 seasons as the quarterback coach for Drew Brees and the Saints. The offense that leaned on pass catching running backs and was pass heavy until Drew Brees started to tone it down a bit and they began to do more of a run heavy approach, but still really emphasized the running back and the passing game. So to just touch on Justin Herbert, last year was his rookie season. Forcing the action with the injury to Tyrod Taylor. Finished as the quarterback 9 in fantasy in a super pass-heavy offense. Threw for over 4,300 yards, 31 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. added on 230 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns, only had one bust game. And it's his year 2, but has a new head coach. For me, where Justin Herbert is in drafts, I think the offense is still going to be super pass heavy. They're going to be in a competitive division that with the Raiders and the Chiefs who love throwing the football down the field. So I think where Justin Herbert is, you're drafting him if you're happy with your roster so far, because he's going in round 7, round 8 right now, where it's either you're picking a super important player who could be a flex guy, or you're picking someone who could be a difference maker, like maybe the tight end you believe in, or you're drafting the quarterback that you want because you don't want to deal with the late round quarterbacks, but you've already missed all the high end ones in round 5 and 6. So taking Justin Herbert and the spot he's going is if you're building out your team and you have a very comfortable set of wide receivers and running backs already. Looking at the running back room, it's Austin Eckler and Joshua Kelly. So last year, Austin Eckler finished as a running back 35, missed 6 games due to injury. But if you look at the weeks he came back, if you look at specifically week 12 to week 17, he finished as a running back 8. He had 530 yards in the season with 1 touchdown. But the key thing about Austin Eckler is he had 54 receptions for 403 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. Austin Eckler alone has 22% of the target market share in those games. He's coming back fully healthy as the lead back as well. Because if you remember last year, there's a very frustrating presence in the backfield for Austin Eckler owners. And his name was Joshua Kelly, who finished as a running back 62 and was a very irritating handcuff. He had 354 yards and 2 touchdowns, 23 receptions, and 150 yards through the air. He started out the year with too many carries. He's getting 12 carries, 19 carries, instead of Austin Eckler getting those. He couldn't get it done as a starter when Eckler went down, which I think is what the team saw. So I think this year we're going to see a lot more of Austin Eckler and not the team trying to force Joshua Kelly into the starting role. So the verdict really is you really want to draft Austin Eckler this year. Kelly should only be picked up as insurance for Austin Eckler owners. In the wide receiver room, we've got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams to really just be looking at right now. So last year, everyone was really unsure about Keenan Allen because no one was super thrilled with the run-heavy approach with Tyrod Taylor as quarterback. But once Justin Herbert became QB, Keenan Allen finished the year as a wide receiver 14, soaking up 28% of the target share. He had 100 receptions for 922 yards, 8 touchdowns. He would have finished a lot higher if he didn't get injured those last 2 games, which were very crucial to the Chargers' potential of making playoffs. He had 5 games over 100 yards. His best game was 16 for 145 and 1, and he had 4 bust games. Keenan Allen was by far the best receiver on the Chargers, and Justin Herbert learned that early and is his go-to target. Instead of your typical tight end being the safety blanket, Justin Herbert has picked Keenan Allen to be that guy as well, so it's only going to boost Keenan Allen's outlook for the 2021 season. Another guy who's always been on everyone's breakout roster but hasn't done it yet is Mike Williams. Wide receiver 45, had a 14% target market share last year. He's going into year 4, had 48 receptions for 756 yards last year and 5 touchdowns. He's been a big boomer bust receiver. It's either he gets you 0 points or he gets you 30 points a week. So the thing is with Mike Williams, he's had a year where he's had over 1,000 receiving yards. He's also had a year with 10 plus touchdowns, but he's never had those 2 at the same time, which has never made him an ultimate fantasy pick. He's the potential breakout this season if he doesn't get injured, because what Mike Williams does, he plays every single down like it's his last down, giving no concern for his body. So he'll go up and make a catch, but then come down to get injured for a few weeks. So he's slotted to be the X receiver in the new system, and the X receiver in most offenses tends to get a high volume in targets. So if this is going to be a year where something happens, I'm taking Mike Williams late in rounds. If he's in the 10th, 11th round and he's just sitting there, he's my guy for that round. So my verdict is draft Allen in round 3 if you want to pick your first receiver there, and target Mike Williams as a late round pick as a potential breakout for your roster, with super high wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 1 upside if things come together for Mike Williams. Speaking about the tight ends on the Chargers, we have Jared Cook, finished last year as the tight end 17 with the Saints, 38 receptions for 504 yards and 7 touchdowns. Now you do have to remember he did lose Drew Brees, who targeted him. Jared Cook was not the target for Taysom Hill when Taysom Hill took over for that stretch. Jared Cook's best game last year was 5 for 71 and a touchdown, had 9 games over 8 points, and will be trying to fill the Hunter Henry role in the Chargers offense, which he could do. He has the experience to. It's Jared Cook at that point where he's too old and can't get it done anymore, or is he going to be that consistent tight end for the Chargers offense? One thing to note is the team is excited about their other tight end, Donald Parham, who didn't get a lot of work last year. He had 10 receptions on 20 targets for 160 yards and 3 touchdowns, but would do a lot every time the ball connected with him. So for my verdict on the tight end room is, you're drafting Jared Cook super late for that consistency, or you're going to pick him as a streamer when he gets cut from another team because he could start off slow in the new system. Maybe doesn't do well and will fall to becoming a streamer potentially. But you could draft him late if you haven't drafted a tight end yet, just to see what happens week 1 or 2, and then cut him and pick up someone else from the streaming pool if that's the way you want to go with him. Our last team on the list, the Denver Broncos, finished 5-11 last year, missing playoffs. We're looking at their rosters. The quarterback is Drew Lock. But is it Drew Lock? They traded for Teddy Bridgewater, but right now on the roster, Drew Lock is still the technical quote-unquote starter. Right now, the running back room is Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams and Royce Freeman. Wide receivers is Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, and Tim Patrick. And their tight end is Noah Fant. They had the 23rd best offense last year, which isn't good, and the 21st ranked defense. They had a 57-43 pass run split, and they have the 6th easiest schedule for the 2021 season. So here's the biggest issue with the Broncos right now is no one really knows exactly who their quarterback is going to be. It's between Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. Last year, Drew Lock finished as the quarterback 23, and Teddy Bridgewater finished as the quarterback 19. So Drew Lock threw for almost 3,000 yards for 16 touchdowns to 15 interceptions, which is a terrible interception-touchdown ratio. Had 160 rush yards for 3 touchdowns, 4 games over 20 points, but busted on you twice in the games he wasn't injured. His best receiver finished as the wide receiver 39, and that was Tim Patrick. Teddy Bridgewater, on the other hand, threw for 3,700 yards, 15 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. Still not great, but did manage 280 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns, which does make up for the lack of passing touchdowns. He had 5 games over 20 points and busted on you twice. The key thing about Teddy Bridgewater is he supplied DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson as wide receiver 2s, finishing as wide receiver 22 and 24. So my verdict is, don't draft either quarterback. Please, will the NFL gods allow Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson to become the quarterback for the Denver Broncos? At best, I hope it's Teddy Bridgewater because then he could potentially supply Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy as wide receiver 2s, or maybe one of them does make that leap and becomes a wide receiver 1. But I just don't have faith in Drew Lock doing that next year. In the running back room, we've got Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. So last year, Melvin Gordon finished as the running back 13, 986 yards and 9 touchdowns, adding 32 receptions for 158 yards and 1 touchdown. That's just about 1,100 to 1,200 total yards. And the feeling is the team just seems to be riding out the 2-year contract they signed with him. They aren't in love with Melvin Gordon because what they did in the draft was they drafted rookie out of UNC, Javonte Williams. 3rd running back taken in the draft. Got a lot of comparison to Nick Chubb. He was the main 1-2 punch back of UNC. And the thing is, if you draft a rookie early in the draft, NFL teams take rookies in the first 2 or 3 or even 4 rounds. That's a high-end pick in a rookie running back, so that means they do eventually want to use that running back in their system. But the problem with this is the Broncos' bye week doesn't happen until week 11, so with the trend of rookie running backs taking over after bye weeks, that's going to be too late in the season if you take Javonte Williams where he is in drafts. So I think your hope is Javonte Williams makes enough of a noise to take over the starting role in the preseason, because I don't want to take Javonte Williams in the 8th or 9th round and then just have him sit on my bench until week 12. That's going to be way too long. So my verdict for these guys is you don't draft Gordon, you take Javonte Williams if he establishes himself before the season, or you're just taking a player based on hope You're basically hoping that Melvin Gordon stays in the starting role, or you're hoping Javonte Williams takes over. Because there really isn't a world where they both succeed on the Broncos offense. In the wide receiver room for the Broncos, we've got Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, and Tim Patrick. So the biggest name, Courtland Sutton, he didn't play last year. He played in one game, lost the majority of the season to injury, went 3 for 66 in that one game. The thing about Courtland Sutton, he has the potential to be a top wide receiver 1. Finished 2019 as a wide receiver 19 with Joe Flacco as his quarterback. So where he's going in drafts is around where he's going in drafts is wide receiver 29, 27. He's in that range of guys that are kind of being given up on, but still has that potential to be a wide receiver 1. If Aaron Rodgers goes to the Broncos, Courtland Sutton will rise immediately into the 5th round. That's my belief. His other guy, who was the number 1 target, at least we hoped he was the number 1 target last year, was Jerry Jeudy. Finished as the wide receiver 43, had 22% of the target market share, 52 receptions for 856 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jerry Jeudy was actually the most targeted wide receiver with targets that were deemed uncatchable last year. So that being said, if at least Teddy Bridgewater takes over, he'll get more catchable targets and can easily show wide receiver 2 upside. The next guy on the list, KJ Hamler, who's ranked as the 3rd wide receiver on their depth chart, had 12% of the target market share last year, 30 receptions for 381 yards and 3 touchdowns. Another name on this list, a wide receiver 39 last year, was Tim Patrick, 17% of the target market share, 51 receptions for 742 yards. If you want to go back and listen to all the stats over again, all you need to walk away with is that Broncos targets with Drew Lock at quarterback are not valuable. Even if you're getting at least 1/5 or 20% of the targets, you're getting wide receiver 43 numbers, which is not what you want with someone getting that much of a target market. So really my verdict is Courtland Sutton will come back and take a lot of shares from everyone. Sutton and Jerry Jeudy will be low-end wide receiver 2s with upside if Teddy Bridgewater takes over. If it's Drew Lock, I'm staying away from almost all of the Broncos wide receivers at this point. To round out this whole thing, tight end Noah Fant. If you're drafting Fant, you're hoping for a potential breakout season, which is what we were hoping for with last year, because when Sutton went down, Noah Fant was the most experienced wide receiver pass catcher in the room, but only finished as the tight end 13 because Noah Fant also suffered a ton of injuries throughout the season. He had 62 receptions for 673 yards and 3 touchdowns, and that's a 20% market share. If Courtland Sutton comes back, those numbers will most likely go down along with Jerry Jeudy's. So the verdict is you're drafting him late, hoping that he gets a good quarterback. If somehow Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson ends up in Denver, Noah Fant will be a pretty solid tight end pick. But if it's Drew Lock, I'm avoiding him altogether. If it's Teddy Bridgewater, I will most likely want him as a streamer, but he's going to get drafted too early in drafts because of that. So my verdict is don't draft him. Don't make the mistake of drafting a Denver Bronco wideout if Drew Lock is the quarterback or if you don't believe in Teddy Bridgewater. To wrap up this episode, this is the time of year where you really want to pay attention to camp speak. Coaches are going to hype up their players that they just got or just drafted. Beat writers are going to write negative things about the players they don't like. You just have to read through it and really just see the kind of consistent themes and what the players are actually doing in camp and who's taking first team reps and who's not taking first team reps, because you can say a lot of things, but actions are louder than words. As always, follow us on all the social media pages. I didn't mention it before, but you can find us on TikTok and Instagram as Why You're Wrong FFB, on Twitter as You're Wrong FFB. And just remember, keep mock drafting, keep practicing, be ready for the season, don't fall victim to tilt in the draft, and be prepared. And as always, cheers. But I've got nothing to cheers with, so peace out, guys.